Good morning. Thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy. There is so much in the news right now, but I want to take a little different tack rather than diving into the news, and I want to focus on something that impacts every single taxpayer, and that's the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Knowing what your rights are and how the IRS and states should be respecting your rights is absolutely key. And that's one of the biggest concerns that we see going on in our crazy judicial system. The biggest news was the conviction of Trump. But the rule of law is so important. Following that and using that for your benefit and to protect yourself that's my job as a tax attorney. And I see people being run over roughshod by the IRS, and that's what I fight more than anything else. So to make sure that you are taken care of, that your rights are respected, is absolutely key. And we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everybody. And I again have a lot of information to cover today. To be honest, I don't really plan to talk about the Trump convictions. Indirectly, yes, but the main concern here is the rule of law and the protections it offers not only to the larger country, but also you as individuals. So that's why, if anything, as an attorney, it bothers me many irregularities that happened during the trial, and the idea of using the courts to go after political opponents, especially during an election season. That's very scary. So let's see what the appeals court's doing, because it's getting appealed immediately. It's going to take years for that to happen. So will it affect the election? Who knows? What will be the outcome of this? Who really knows? So I will talk about issues addressing this, but I think understanding the rule of law and how it can help you is more important, especially to the show, but to the tax, understanding the importance of following the rule of law and following due process. There's reasons why we have legal precedent. There's reasons why we have the rules of law in place, and that's to protect the innocent. So, and I'm not going to dive into my opinion. Yes, I was a prosecutor for a short while, but again, I'm not again, this is a different beast. I'm not going to dive into this, and I think there's better uses of our time. So, not that it's not important, but I think everybody else is arguing and commenting on it, and we do try to keep this as a non-political show. Don't always do that well at that, but we try. First article I do want to show, and this all has to do with the economy, which again, there's a lot of distractions from some of the larger issues. What we really should be focusing on in this presidential election is who's going to do the best for our country. What are the issues? And this is what drives me nuts about politics from both sides of the aisle. We're not talking about economic plans. We're not talking about what's best for the country. We're talking about personal attacks, whether it's Biden's senility or Trump being a criminal. That's what most of the people are talking about. We're not talking about how things actually affect us in real life and which policies are best for ourselves and our children. So that's what I want to focus on. This article is from the Daily Caller. Again, just talking about the first quarter was revised downward for GDP, which is not good news. It was revised down from 1.6% to 1.3%. So again, that is a significant, revisal downward, or downward revision. And they were first hoping that it would be around 2.2%, which is more in line with typical growth. To have it almost a whole percentage point lower is concerning. Things were red hot in 23, which is why we had so much inflation. But 4.9, 3.4%. The problem with those periods of growth is where the money came from. So why for the revision? And they always revise the numbers. They revise the numbers to updates showing that consumer spending is down, private inventory investment is down, and the expansion of federal government spending were lower. So you had big increases last year, but you can't continue to increase that spending year after year. So the federal government exploded the budget. Now it's over $6 trillion, but they can't continue to add 5% to government spending year after year, or even higher amounts just to keep things up. So that's part of the problem, is even though we're spending higher, when you throw a bunch of money at the economy, it has a big initial impact, but that initial impact goes away very quickly. And with interest rates in 22 and 23 as high as they were, whatever gain from the spending, I would argue, was eaten up very quickly by inflation. So current dollar GDP is also revised down from 4.8 to 4.3%, and domestic income was just 1.5%. So again, this is kind of getting into the weeds as far as the numbers. And then again, you have another Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, saying, well, we're not in stagflation yet. Saying that there's low unemployment, even though unemployment just ticked up. And he's saying the speed of inflation isn't going down, it's still going up, but it's not increasing as fast as before. The problem is it's double the rate of any growth, if not triple the rate of any growth. And the government numbers are not correct. So that is really our concern here. Are we experiencing stagflation in real time, where the economy is stagnating, either no growth to low growth, but we have really high inflation? I think we're heading there, personally. People look at cherry-picked rosy numbers to argue otherwise, but unemployment is going up despite all the the manipulation of numbers. Deceleration, inflation is still increasing at twice the rate, if not more, of actual GDP growth. And then Biden tried to blame rising inflation on corporate greed. However, if you look at the trends over time, you have GDP here. You have the GDP, which is the blue line, and gross domestic income, the purple line. So this just shows the difference between, and sometimes income is higher. They're usually about the same. 2020, it dropped like a rock, then came back up. But what we're seeing in 22, 23 is that GDP is outpacing income. And that's not good. It's not good for the average worker. It's not good for our economy. It means that you're having more inflation, but it's not translating to money in people's pockets. Government spending is masking a lot of these ills, and we can't continue to do that forever. Once you pull back on government spending, there's going to be a lot of pain that will have to be spread out throughout the economy. But eventually, the adults need to take over and get our fiscal house in order, because it's a train wreck right now. Again, one of the concerns is credit card inflation is up. Not only cumulative amount of debt held by Americans, but all of this is being affected by the Fed rate. It's still persistently high. I don't think they're going to change that. Let's jump to the next article, because we actually did not move. It's already 13 minutes after. Time flies so quickly when you're talking about economic news. Yes. and this article just talks about ConocoPhillips expanding, purchasing Marathon Oil. Now, ConocoPhillips is the third largest company, and normally when you see a few companies dominating an entire market, it's a bad thing. You get to monopolies or duopolies where you have just a small number of companies. You see the same thing with airlines. It's very, very hard to get into those industries. And there are a lot of, it's very regulation heavy. So part of it is it saves a lot of money to consolidate companies, but that can also be a very negative thing when it comes to increase prices for consumers. So, I mean, I like this article from the Epic Times because it goes and it addresses both sides and both arguments. The benefits of the deal estimated 500 million in cost savings, mainly from you have one administration. You don't need the same overhead or corporate organization to manage two companies, so that gets rid of a lot of overhead there. Operating costs, improving capital efficiencies. But one of the biggest reasons for this is dealing with government regulations. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. We're talking about this merger. So merger and regulatory scrutiny, it costs the same to deal, it's the same amount of regulations for a smaller oil company as it is a larger one. And so the larger ones that have more oil, more revenue can deal with that so much easier. And by combining and merging the companies, they don't have to deal with it. So it really is a win-win for the company to merge. The question is, and Chuck Schumer is raising a lot of these concerns, as well as other Senate Democrats, and I'm not saying they're wrong. Whenever you have a greater concentration, whenever you have small operators being squeezed out, it can lower wages. It can cause anti-competitive harms. And I do think that is something that needs to be concerned. But ExxonMobil Chevron just acquired. So ExxonMobil just took over Pioneer, and this is number one and number two, ExxonMobil and Chevron. Chevron just took over Hess, so they have been letting the others consolidate. Not to say that they should let it happen here, but we need some consistency here, and someone needs to be watching out for the American consumer in a way that makes sense. This can make ConocoPhillips either more competitive with the other big two companies, or it can make it a lot easier to have an effective monopoly when it comes to gas and oil, which can be a really bad thing as well. So again, what's right, what's wrong here? Sorry, you get to figure that out. I'm not going to give you a straight answer because I don't know. There's a lot to consider here. Moving on to the next article, which we're going to have to cover when we come back. But this is talking about the trade deficit from Breitbart News. It is exploding, but we'll have to cover this when we come back as we're out of time. Well, Taxes Made Easy. Hubert Johnson here with Guardian Tax Law. Welcome back, everybody. So, the trade deficit, it's growing. It's getting worse. It was expected. It went up to 92.3 billion. Economists actually thought it was going to go up to 92.5 billion. Main thing, imports are rising, and exports only increased by 0.5%. Import of autos, foreign autos, up by 10.4%. And then exports only grew by 3.6%. So again, we have a lot more imports of goods, and then capital goods imports also grew at 3.5%, and then industrial supplies at 2.1%. So, and then one of the biggest things, U.S. agricultural products shrank 6.6%. So not a whole lot to this article, but again, the trade deficit is something to be aware of. And I think it just shows further weakening in our manufacturing and export. So not good news for our industrial output. So this is an interesting article. Truckers suing New York City to delay congestion pricing. So what is congestion pricing? It's a tax to try to keep vehicles out of lower Manhattan because they're congested there. It's one of the most congested cities in the world. And so they're trying to charge vehicles so much, vans and trucks, $36 per trip during peak hours. And then they're going to use that for local businesses and consumers, as well as to expand and fund mass transit. So there's 8 lawsuits that are filed against this. It's supposed to go in effect, I believe, June 1st. But for vehicles, it's a 15 per day charge. And if you want to stay overnight, it's a $3.75 charge. Now, they do have similar pricing plans in London, Stockholm, Singapore, Milan, and New York being one of the busiest and craziest cities in the world. This is one way to kind of collect more taxes, fund mass transit even more. But there are plenty of delivery trucks. Some of the biggest people that are suing are Uber, Lyft. They're getting their fares increased by $2.50, whereas taxis are only $1.25. The plan is to raise $1 billion by targeting Uber, Lyft, and small to medium trucks. So a lot of people are throwing a fit about this. New Jersey, which is where a lot of the trucks are coming from. Staten Island is suing. And so it's really going to be interesting to see what happens. Again, owner of one business is saying it's going to cost him $400,000 to $500,000 a year. And he's saying, look, we have an $85 delivery, for example. If you slap a $25 tax on it or toll, it's like there's no more money for profit. So how do they operate? They're going to have to increase their rates so they can have some profit. But that is probably going to make things, deliveries to Manhattan, lower Manhattan, more expensive than ever. That might just hurt the very people in the area that they're trying to help. So overall goal is to get fewer vehicles, estimated 100,000 fewer vehicles on the road. But, again, it's yet to be seen. Let's see what happens. And this is the neat thing about the American experiment. If they really want to pass this tax, do it. See what happens. If they like the results, they can continue to expand it. If it creates more problems, they can get rid of it. So, it's going to hurt a lot of people, but at the same time, the idea is to have less traffic in downtown, Manhattan. Again, it's the biggest, one of the biggest cities in the world. I don't know how you get away from traffic in New York City. So, let's see how this goes. Now, getting to some of our main topics here. And this kind of goes more towards what's happening in the news with the Trump tax case. And this is from Politico. Politico is a left-leaning site. And it came across this article. Ironically enough, and this is from January. But, this is a very interesting article. The person that leaked the Trump tax returns was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The judge says it cannot be open season on our elected officials. So background here, all the way back before the 2020 election, or actually I believe the 2016 election, actually, I think it was before the 2020. Um, a former IRS consultant, if you believe it was just one person doing this, leaked all of Donald Trump's tax returns, as well as hundreds of other or thousands of other wealthy people to the news media. So the Justice Department had asked for the maximum statutory sentence, and she agreed, calling these are egregious crimes. Why are they egregious crimes? Yeah, we gotta close my window real quick. I was trying to have some good airflow going, but sometimes it just gets loud outside. This is really key. When you target the sitting president of the United States, you're targeting the office, and when you're targeting the office of the president, you're targeting democracy. You're targeting our constitutional system of government. That we follow by rules, we follow laws, and to get the desired result of what people think might be happening, it's not okay to just go break the law and violate the rights of other people. When we allow that to happen, people can't trust our system, they can't trust our government. They have rights and privileges with the IRS. And we're going to get to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And so this goes directly to that the government should be making sure that they aren't violating people's rights. And when they do, there should be consequences. So, again, his lawyers, of course, trying to get the minimum sentence, claimed he believed the public had the right to know how much Trump and the others paid in taxes. He didn't. The public didn't have that right. Even though other candidates had voluntarily released that information, there's a huge difference between if you can't get what you want legally to go and just do it illegally and violate people's rights. So I believe the judge was a Biden nominee, and I completely agree with her arguments and decisions here. Of course, the New York Times and ProPublica, which published the information and probably paid for it, disagree. But again, we are a nation of laws. We are a nation that goes after making sure people's rights are protected. And when we start violating these rights, it's really creates a lot of problems. The IRS has suffered plenty of problems in the past, from targeting conservatives as far as nonprofits to targeting people that are outspoken. Again, and it's these kinds of things that violate people's rights. And when we use the government, like the DOJ, there's plenty of accusations it's being used for political purposes. So I had a client who they came from a foreign country. And the husband was ex-military. He knew that we have rights or should have rights here in the United States. And so they were audited. He thought it was unfair and thought they should contest it. And so he contested it. His wife was scared, very concerned. How dare you question the government? Because where she came from, you just didn't do that. The government made a decision and you just had to go along with it. That's not freedom. That's not a government for and by the people. That is heavy-handed tactics where, again, the government's wrong half the time. And that's my job as an attorney, is to hold them accountable to protect taxpayer rights and making sure they're actually following the law. So I'm going to share one more tab before we dive into the topic for the day. And I'm kind of leaning there already. A lot of people think that what happened to Trump is unfair. I can list plenty of reasons why this very well, or the convictions very well could and in my opinion, will be overturned on appeal. But it's not just Trump they're targeting. They're going after Justice Alito. They're going after others. And here's the interesting part is the article I just shared by a Biden-appointed judge upheld the rule of law and applied a severe consequence to someone that just did what they wanted because they thought that, for their political purposes, it was okay to violate the rights of others. It's not okay. We need to follow the rule of law here. And then here you have Dick Durbin, the Senate Judiciary Chairman, trying to demand information from Chief Justice Roberts, trying to get Alito to be recused in any case with Donald Trump, because what just happened it's very possible to go to the Supreme Court. And they're trying all the different tactics. His wife flew an appeal to heaven banner. She likes to fly flags. That's what she does. And they're claiming this had racist overtones or had something to do with the January 6th. The facts actually show that they were actually having a dispute with their neighbors, and that's what it was. And San Francisco even flew it last year. It is one of our historical flags. The problem here is that too many people are attacking the Supreme Court and making up spurious charges here, trying to pressure the justice, trying to pressure our judicial system. And the same people are doing the same thing on the left, and nobody cares. It's that kind of partisanship that, again, doesn't exist in a healthy democracy. And I think they talk about the threat to democracy posed by President Trump, and I'm not 100% fan of Trump. There are things I really don't like that he did. I have my concerns about him, but the way that they're attacking not only Trump, but the Supreme Court is concerning to me. And moving on, I have just one last article I'm going to share before we dive into the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And this is just about the IRS making direct file a permanent option. So they're slowly expanding this. But here's my biggest concern with this is when you have the IRS preparing your returns, how do you contest it? How do you fight it? How do you actually stand up for your rights when your preparer is also the IRS? If they mess up, if there's a problem there, there's no accountability. And that's my concern there. Again, it's there, it's available if you have a very simple return. Feel free to do that. But what I really want to focus on today is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It's called IRS Publication 1. And this is to protect you against being run over by the IRS. These are your rights. And if the IRS starts violating these rights, you should stand up and say, this is not okay. I either want an attorney on this, but again, the IRS violates these rights all the time. And it's very infuriating to see it happen. And they do it mostly when someone is not represented. Does every case warrant having a tax attorney or a professional hired on for a case? Absolutely not. But there's plenty of times where the IRS does violate people's rights. And again, that's why we do what we do, to stand up for the average taxpayer. First right, the right to be informed, to have good information. Due to the IRS hiring so many new people, their ability to give good information has declined dramatically. It's always been an issue where the IRS, especially when you first call in, you're talking to the first layers of their bureaucracy, half the time they don't know what they're talking about. And I'm not going to be nice to the IRS here. I have the people at the IRS tell me all the time ridiculous things. The IRS is trying to change policies. They're trying to get more direct. I have a case right now where they're absolutely refusing to follow the financial analysis for a client, and we will be appealing it. We will be filing official complaints on the case. We're going to be kicking and screaming because what they're doing is not right and it violates our taxpayer rights. So you have a right to be informed. You can ask questions. You should be able to ask questions. If someone gets upset, ask for a manager because they're not doing their job. Part of their job is to give you good information to answer your questions. You're entitled to clear explanation of the laws and IRS procedures. You should be informed of IRS decisions and have clear explanations of the outcomes. That's hard to get most of the time. Part of it is because you can't talk to the right people most of the time. But again, if you have questions, give us a call. You have a right to quality service. This is so lacking at the IRS. They hire these new people. Most of them are going into collections to actually take money from people, to do more audits. They're not going into providing better customer service. There are a couple areas where we have seen slight improvements in customer service, but overall, the way the IRS is training people, they're training them to be aggressive. They're not training them to provide excellent customer service. They're training them to squeeze as much as they can out of taxpayers, not to be government servants. But do you have a right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance? If they're not professional, demand a manager. You can always speak to a supervisor about inadequate service. You should, and if it's bad enough, you can always file a TIGTA report, and that's TIGTA. You have the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. So that includes addressing and questioning interest and penalties, and to make sure all tax payments have been assessed properly. You have the right to challenge the IRS's position and to be heard. So this is appeals, this is going to tax court, there are plenty of mechanisms using Taxpayer Advocate to challenge the IRS's position and make sure that your rights are respected. We have a lot of success challenging the IRS when they're wrong to get this taken care of. You have the right to appeal to an independent forum, even going outside of the IRS. So most people don't understand that. So you have a right to a fair and impartial administrative appeal. And that goes to the Office of Appeals Decisions. And you could also take your case to court to fight this. And we're going to have to come back after the break and continue this. Welcome back to Taxes Made Easy. Thank you for watching live or on rebroadcast as we walk through Publication 1. And this kind of summarizes your rights as taxpayers for not only you, but for your businesses as you deal with the IRS. So moving on, and I've kind of run through these because there's 10 of them. But if you have questions about any of them, you think your rights are being violated, again, the IRS is not good at a lot of these. Informing people correctly, quality service. You have a right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax, but you have to go in there and fight it frequently. And to challenge the IRS's positions, you usually have to demand those rights. And this is why sometimes it can, if you have a more complicated case, a bigger case, it can absolutely pay to have a tax professional handling your case for you that knows how to address these issues. Finality. So this is why this is important, because the IRS only has so many years to go and audit or do an underreporter, etc. And you have a right to know when the IRS has finished an audit and you have the final balance to address. So the IRS shouldn't be surprising you, especially with the same tax year. And again, it's when you have a final tax bill, it can give you a lot of peace of mind to know this is how much I owe, this is the best way to deal with it, and take care of it. The right to privacy. This is huge. So whenever you deal with a tax attorney, and I tell clients all the time, or prospective clients even, that when you're dealing with a tax attorney, you have attorney-client privilege. You have full attorney-client privilege, so whatever you share won't be shared with the IRS without your authorization. Same with the IRS. Your case and any information that's touching your case shouldn't be shared with anybody. So, except for, if you have a tax lien notice, the IRS has to follow certain policies to protect, to go through and make collections. But nobody should be able to call the IRS and discuss your account. Nobody should get any information, unless it's happening in the process of collection. So the revenue officer shouldn't be talking to anybody. Anybody calls in can't just get your information. You have due process rights when dealing with the IRS. And this is more important. I mean, people call me all the time and they think, look, the IRS just came in and swooped my accounts. Well, yeah, but they have to send you information. They have to send you letters. They have a process they have to go through. Or you can appeal and get their collection stopped like that. Do they sometimes mess up and not follow their processes? Yes, but it's rare. They're actually pretty good about going through the steps. Many taxpayers are good at ignoring all the letters. Or if you haven't updated your address with the IRS, you might have your letters going somewhere else. And that's not the IRS's fault, because they don't know when people move. There's no automatic update, and that's probably a good thing. But it is still your responsibility to either get your mail forwarded or to update your information with the IRS. So if you do have tax issues and you move frequently, it's better to use either a mailbox or something that people, that is consistent. Sometimes a parent's home, a PO box or something like that, and have someone check it regularly. And it would be, that's the whole goal, is to go through that, make sure that it's not more invasive than it needs to be. So this is enforcement action should not be any more intrusive than necessary. So, and that includes search and seizure protections. Again, and that's for criminal cases. In most cases, seizure, very rare circumstances. And then you can demand a collection due process hearing. Under this right to privacy, I mean, this is why it is such a big deal. One, that people in the IRS, because again, the idea that one person was able to circumvent all the IRS policies and procedures the IRS has a lot of holes in their system. It is a huge, giant system, and people's information has been periodically hacked and disclosed. But it kind of begs the questions how one contractor was able to get thousands of people's of information of the politicians, wealthy individuals, and then dump it on the internet. That's a huge breach of privacy, and one person should not be able to do that. And this is maybe in a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think it was just one person. I think it was intentional and done for political purposes, which is scary when the government is targeting political opponents like that. Today of all days, it's only gotten worse. But again, when one person's rights or when political opponents are targeted, it only makes things worse over time. Confidentiality. This goes right along with the right of privacy. Any information provided to the IRS will not be disclosed to any third party unless authorized by the taxpayer or by law. So if you tell them where your bank accounts are, they're going to go after them. Employees. So again, taxpayers have a right to expect that appropriate action will be taken against employees, preparers, and others who wrongfully use or disclose taxpayer return information. So again, this is a classic case of why the individual that released the Trump returns, as well as thousands of others, was hit with a maximum sentence of only 5 years, but that was the maximum that they could hit him with, was 5 years in prison. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. It shows that there are people taking this seriously, and when a tax return preparer doesn't follow their fiduciary duties to respect your privacy and confidentiality, there are consequences. They can be reported to the IRS. You can file a malpractice suit against them. They all have insurance to guard against mistakes like this, and this is a willful mistake. So people that wrongfully disclose your information is a huge violation of your privacy. And again, there are repercussions or options available to rectify the situation, address it. The right to retain representation. This is an interesting one. Too often, I hear the IRS telling people that they don't need a tax attorney, that they don't need someone to hire them. They don't need to hire somebody. That violates this right. The federal government should not be persuading someone not to find out what their rights and options are. It's straight from Publication 1, the right to retain representation. So taxpayers have a right to retain authorized representative of their choice and to represent them in their dealings with the IRS. I have had too many, and there are bad companies, there are people that go out there and don't represent taxpayers well. It's a shame, it's a travesty. I wish they would focus more, the IRS would focus more on dealing with some of the bad actors out there rather than violating people's rights. You have it, and I highly recommend that people go to multiple sources. You can go to an authorized representative, a tax attorney, or tax firm or a tax company that helps individuals. You can go to a low-income tax clinic. You can go online and get plenty of information. And that's one of the things that we run our company on, is that it shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg to get good representation and to get some good information about your case. That's why we provide free consultations. And again, there's plenty of times where we give people free advice, help them out, steer them on the way, and even tell them how they can save money on their own if it's something that makes sense. If it's much more complicated, we'll explain it to them and let them make the decision on how they want to proceed. But anytime the IRS is trying to convince someone, think of it this way. It would be as if a prosecutor sat there and tried to convince a defendant that they didn't need an attorney. that they should represent themselves in court. It's extremely unfair, which is why it's not allowed. Any prosecutor doing that can be disbarred. But yet the IRS violates number 9 here on a regular basis, telling people they don't need a representation, you don't need to call somebody. And so anytime someone's telling you that from the IRS, I would say, what about publication 1, number 9? Aren't you violating my right to representation and to get good information here? Doesn't mean you need to hire someone, but you should always be able to say, look, I want some more information. I want to talk to someone. If they start going on about this, say, look, you're violating my rights right now. I want to talk to your manager. And watch how quickly they backtrack. It's just one I've seen too many times. And I've seen too many revenue officers. But when you call into the IRS, they are not your friend. There are people there that will do right by taxpayers, but they are the exception. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people call in little old widows on Social Security, and the IRS tells them you have to pay so much a month. And there's plenty of times I've called in just because I'm a smart aleck at heart. And I'll ask, oh, well, what are the options here? Someone has this much debt. What can we do? And they're like, oh, well, they have to do this or this or this. I'm like, well, aren't there other options? Well, they might qualify for a non-collectible status, but you have to get all their financial information. You have to fill out these forms. You have to do all that. And I'll be like, oh, well, I'm ready to do that now. And they're like, oh. And then the gig is up. And all of a sudden they change their demeanor and how they're treating the call. So this is how they treat the average taxpayers. It is too often in this, in my opinion, it's not right that they treat taxpayers one way and tax professionals a different way once they realize, okay, they actually understand how this works. We're not going to be able to pull the wool over their eyes. To me, that's frustrating. The government is not, it's a giant collection agency. That's how they act, even though you have these rights. So last one here, right to a fair and just tax system. Believe it or not, there are instances where the IRS will make adjustments based on fairness. It's just not right. It is the exception. But every now and then you can get someone to look at a case and say, okay, this just doesn't make sense. You have to be talking to someone that actually has the ability to do that, and that's quite a few layers deep into the IRS system. But there's times the resolutions are just not fair. I had someone just the other day, again, I was talking, it was actually a New York case, but they said, look, they don't qualify for an offer right now because they're couch surfing. They don't have any expenses. As soon as they get an apartment, as soon as they get their own place, they'll qualify, just resubmit, and it'll come to me and it'll be a shoo-in for an accepted offer. And there are plenty of times that I talk to excellent representatives. They're usually people that have been there for quite some time and that have the experience to look at a case and say, look, this just doesn't make sense. We need to figure something out here. And that is one of the roles of taxpayer advocate service. It's harder than ever to get a hold of taxpayer advocate service because they're overwhelmed because the IRS is doing a horrible job in many respects. Their customer service is horrible. They put out all these announcements how they're going to help people. It's worse than ever. Most of the time you call, you can't even get through to the IRS. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be that there were longer hold times, but it was rare that you would get disconnected by the IRS. And now half the time their systems are so backed up that you can't even talk to anybody. There are options, and the IRS should be considering the facts and circumstances affecting your liabilities, your ability to pay, or your ability to provide information timely. They should be flexible. Now, what I see more often than not is that taxpayers can bear a lot of the blame here when they don't provide information timely, when they don't pay at least estimated tax payments, when they're not getting their act together. That's the problem. but you have the right to receive assistance not only from Taxpayer Advocate Service. And I always recommend people call them, reach out to them. Unfortunately, it's going to take months for them to get something resolved, but people are able to go and set appointments. If you call, there's an appointment line with the IRS. You can call and actually set an appointment to go in and speak to someone face to face. It's only for that appointment, though. They can't help you long term down the road. It's an opportunity to sit down and figure out what's going on with your case. But you have to go in face to face. You have to wait a couple months for the appointment, and then they can't help you long term. It's just they can just communicate with you for that one appointment. But there are ways to get answers. There are ways to get your questions answered. The IRS mission here is to provide top quality service. Sorry. By helping them understand and meet their tax responsibilities and enforce the law with integrity and fairness to all. This should mean something. And when you have questions, when you don't feel like you're being treated fairly, give us a call, 520-485-7371. That's our job. That's why we do what we do, is to help people understand their rights and to defend their rights when dealing with the IRS and state taxes. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.